Welcome to the Emerging Civil War podcast. I'm Chris Mackowski, and joining me from the great Crescent City of New Orleans is my friend Sean Michael Chick. Sean, how are you today?
Oh, I'm doing great. How y'all doing?
Cheers to you as well, my friend. We want to talk a little bit about Shiloh because you recently published a book as part of the Casemate Illustrated series. It's called The Shiloh Campaign 1862 Battle for the Heartland. And you've been working on the Shiloh campaign for a while to do this book. What got
Yeah.
you interested in it?
Oh, that's um so sorry. So in the battle case of Battle of Shiloh, um I read an account of it. I remember I think I was in 10th grade, and I had this book I'd gotten, like, how the libraries will be like, we're getting rid of these old books and you buy them for cheap. So you ever remember anybody by chance, do you remember this book? It was written, I think, in the 50s, 60s, uh for a younger audience, called The Southern Generals by Red Reader.
Oh no, that's a classic though. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I read, I read the book, and you know it, it's an unusual book, but the thing is, the chapter he had on Shiloh is very good. He describes all the officers like Bragg and Breckinridge, and it goes through the battle itself and a not too bad narrative, and I just was captivated with it. Surprise attack, Johnston dying dramatically, Buell arriving with troops, just there's Shiloh's pure drama. And then maybe a year or two after that, a friend of mine gave me his pirated copy. Well, I think he had the original one. He burned a CD for me, from the Talonsoft Battleground series, Battleground Shiloh. You ever played those or anything? Oh man, it was like,
Yeah.
yeah, it was like a very, very detailed game. You move regiment by regiment, and you had to have like formations you change and everything. And while they're doing it, they were playing music as well. And the game looked, when I say looked really good, I'm not talking like, and this is a late '90s game. I'm not saying it had the graphics of a Castlevania Symphony of the Night or a Mario 64, but it did have this really good color palette, and it had such detail, and they're playing the music as well, and that just really, really got me into the battle. And then I bought, of course, Larry J. Daniels' book. Here we go. Now look at this excellent cover. Look at that. So I bought that at the Books a Million that we had here, and
And his subtitle makes a pretty bold claim, the battle that changed the Civil War, as I remember, right?
he's dead on.
Yeah.
He's dead on. Yeah, exactly. This is I just did a Shiloh talk for the Western Theater people with the Department Number Two podcast.
Hmm.
That was a lot of fun. And I've got all these Shiloh books right here to the left, and I'm looking at, I got, like, I can see Cunningham and Smith staring me right down right now, And I was telling them that all the big Shiloh books, including Wiley's Sword, I like all of them. They're really good. This one's my favorite though, but
Uh,
reading this really got me into it as well. And then I went to the battlefield, this battlefield I've been to the most. And as anybody knows, oh look, see, I even have this in here. This is a plant I plucked from Fairley Field.
wow.
The
Pressed
book.
between the pages.
I wanted to do that because how, like, you look through your parents' stuff as a kid, and you'll find like random knickknacks that weren't there as it was their parents or grandparents.
Mm.
And I found this old encyclopedia written in the 1920s. So when it's talking about World War One, it's saying like, "Oh my God, can you believe we did this? Hope we never do this again."
Yeah. Wow.
Anyway, I'm saying that because they had a flower stuck in the book
Okay.
at this passage about, the encyclopedia's passages. I think it was about John Keats or something. That's how you find out, like, oh, one of your grandparents or great grandparents must have really liked John Keats.
Right.
You know,
Right.
so just press a plan in randomly.
Yeah.
And I thought, I'll do that with this book. And yeah, and then I read maps of Chickamauga, and I was like, oh, fast forward to nowadays and read maps of Chickamauga. Because before that, I was like, oh, I'd like to write about Shiloh, but I don't know what I would do.
Yeah.
Like, I just don't like to, like I used to well, I still just do some board game design, but I used to do a lot of it. And this one publisher said, "Well, you do a Gettysburg game?" And I said, "No." And he's like, "But they sell." And I'm like, I mean, Gettysburg is interesting, but I don't really have anything interesting I want to say about it.
Right. Yeah. You gotta have something you want to say about these things for sure.
Yeah. Like, oh God, my favorite Civil War general is Sherman. I have nothing new to contribute to Sherman.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. A lot of people have said a lot of things about him. Yeah. Right.
yeah. And well, it helps that he said a lot of things too.
Yeah. Indeed, he did.
You know, and so yeah, so Shiloh, the doing Snake maps of Shiloh is the way to do that. And then I've just dug so much into the research. The Casemate book's the first one. I've got so many planned. I'm working on them right now. I did take a little break there because you do something for years. You go like, all right, let me take a little break. That's why I did more Petersburg stuff.
Yeah.
And um, so anyway, so at the end of this year, I hope to have two Shiloh books submitted, and we'll see whenever they come out.
Oh,
So
wow.
that's where like you've been working this for years. I'm like, yeah, but you understand, like it's not going to be one book. I'm doing a whole bunch here,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
means I'm taking a page from Tim Smith on that one because remember he had a bunch of Shiloh books and articles before Conquer and Perish comes out or
Right.
Conquer and Perish, and I do have articles. Like I got a Buell article with North and South, and then I don't know if I don't think it's out yet, but I put in another one I wrote about the 13th Ohio Battery
Okay.
getting vaporized.
Yeah. So, what was it that you decided you had new to say about Shiloh? Since there have been so many books that you've admired, and particularly Larry's, which you said was a real key one for you, but you still brought something new to the conversation.
Yeah. Now I read something about. Sorry. So this is something I read online. So this part could be not true. All right. So Peter Cozzens, if you're out there and you need to correct the record, just let us know. Okay. Supposedly, Peter Cozzens, who I like a lot, like his books a lot, started work on a Shiloh book and abandoned it, saying the battle is too much of a mess or confusing or something. Now, once again, Peter Cozzens, that's just what I read online. If I'm wrong, please let us know, okay? But um, so maps of Shiloh in the maps series. You're trying to make these precise movements in a battle where command and control collapses on both sides almost instantly. And for men who this is their first battle. Now we have the advantage that we do have a lot of reports and sources. That helps. But man, there is so much to go through. So the initial thing was that if I'm doing maps of Shiloh, we can do a very accurate blow by blow account, and especially if you're really getting into on that tactical granular detail. So as an example, the sequence of attack between two of the Confederate brigades when they attack Sherman. Now the first one's Patrick Claiborne, then J. Patton Anderson, and then you have like Robert Russell, Bushrod Johnson. And the thing is, the sequence of attack for two of those brigades wasn't known who went in first. You can't tell from the Union, you can't tell from a lot of the sources. And I finally found the source that says which one goes in first.
Hmm.
Right now, that is a very granular thing, though. Now, if you're a Shiloh nerd, you're like, this is great. you know, like because I asked people, like I asked Tim Smith, I was like, do you know? And he says, like, we can't be for certain. I asked him with the 15th and 16th Iowa. When did those two regiments get engaged? There's an entire folder at the Shiloh National Park debating when they go in.
Hmm.
And when they go in Daniel is different from Smith, is different from Cunningham, I believe, as well. I figured it out.
Okay.
Man, it was a headache. But, it had to be something on that obsessive amount of detail, which is also not something I'm necessarily used to. A Singing Your Praises, I read your Spotsylvania book a few months ago, and
Okay.
I loved it.
Thanks.
Yeah, I thought it was great. But also, I mean, and then, that's something more like what I wrote for my first book. That's saying if I do another battle book after Shiloh, it's going to be more like that, a bit more, a bit more focused out. Whereas this one, I am doing the literal like this regiment goes in this direction, and that one, getting very precise. The other one too is I think, and this is not, I think, and I see this in more and more stuff where Buell's part in the battle is downplayed.
Hmm.
and also the contention that Buell wanted to retreat. He did not want to retreat. He never thought about retreating ever. Him wanting to retreat is stuff said after the battle. There is no evidence for that in 1862.
Hmm.
Without Buell, I believe the Union loses.
Okay. All right. And that's one of the big
Not
controversies
on,
of Shiloh.
but not on April 6th.
Yeah.
So Buell doesn't arrive and save the day on April 6th. The battle's winding down. What about April 7th? You
Yeah.
know, I found evidence that one of the problems the Federals ran into with their artillery on the night of April 6th, like as the last Confederate attacks are happening, they're running out of ammo,
Okay.
of artillery ammo. In fact, and that explains why on the second day of Shiloh, Grant, most of his batteries don't go in the battle on the second day. They're in low on ammo. And the other one, too, is I contend also that on April 7th, if Beauregard had not attacked right away, he actually could have held off the Union.
Oh, wow. And again, another controversy there. Yeah.
Yeah, but the reason is because I'm looking at the number of men involved, but also Buell's army. One of the not some accounts say Buell brought fresh troops. He did not.
Yeah.
They forced marched there and had no food. I'm talking about Buell, and also that's one of the reasons why like there's not much of a pursuit. One of the reasons is because Buell's men start collapsing around 1-2 p.m. from exhaustion.
Yeah.
One of them. What's one of the quotes I have? He says like, uh, "By the time the Confederates retreated, we were very tired and very happy the Battle of Shiloh was over."
Mm.
Yeah, I like that line.
Yeah.
In
Jeez.
fact, I think that's how I end one of the chapters in the Casemate book. I think But anyways, so yeah, so I got my own stuff that I would my own contentions in there, and then going into more detail, trying to get like also like trying to figure out what exactly are Albert City Johnston's last words. Like I said, some of this is just for us Shiloh nerds.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then other ones are I do have my own points I'm going to be making. You know,
So,
by the way, one of them that Dave Powell made that I agree with is that Beauregard's formation with the waves of attacks is just the best solution in a bad situation.
right. Right.
I think Powell's right.
Yeah. So explain that to us. Because Beauregard basically gets sent to the front to direct troops in, and he executes Albert Sidney Johnson's game plan, not in the way Johnson had laid it out. And so there's been a little bit of controversy as to, why he does that and whether it's effective. And you're giving him good marks for it.
I'm saying that like, but Beauregard says, and like Beauregard, like Sherman, wrote a lot. His papers are everywhere. So I found a kind of like some notes he wrote in the Western Reserve, and he straight up explains. He goes, "If we attacked in columns, which actually isn't what Johnston. Remember, Johnston approved his attack formations too.
Yeah.
So people like will blame Beauregard. I'm like, Johnston signed off on that. The people who said that Beauregard went against his will is post-war,
Mm.
and is
Okay.
Jefferson Davis and Braxton Bragg. Now, Bragg and Beauregard got along very well around Shiloh, not so much after. And of course, Davis and Beauregard, you ask them who they hate most in the world, they're going to say each other. So, um, not Abraham Lincoln. The real enemy is the other guy. No wonder you guys lost. So, anyways, uh, what happens is that Beauregard says that to attack down the woods in those narrow roads, you'd have to march in a column, and then you have to deploy in the line anyway. And then you can be delayed going down those roads. And Powell makes a great point. That's the formation that Jackson uses at Chancellorsville, is the same one Beauregard uses at Shiloh. Now, the Jackson one leads to confusion. It's not perfect. It's just that given the terrain. And also, that's something to keep in mind, too. One of the reasons the Federals get surprised is because Sherman and Charles F. Smith, who was the first guy in charge of the expedition down there, they chose that as the campground based on the fact that it had good water, but also terrain. Sherman kept being like, there's no way they're going to attack us here, man. They can only come in one way. Their terrain's rough. I mean, Sherman's like, this is a great defensive position. Only an idiot would attack us. Um, and to be fair, they're right. This is great defensive terrain, you know? And yeah, so Beauregard's looking at this and being like, we have a problem here.
Mm.
And he's right. If they had gone down those narrow country roads like that, deploying that way, it would have taken time. He said, also, remember, these troops are inexperienced. So Beauregard's like, just line up and go forward, guys. But remember, it does lead to problems.
Mm-hmm.
getting confused, breakdown in command control. Um, you also like, I mean, and you know, not that none of the Confederate regiments have seen battle. Some have been at Mill Springs and Belmont
Right.
in particular, but 70 or 80% have not. You know, so
So
you
pretty.
also have like inexperienced staffs too. You know, but anyway, you were saying,
Well, I was
Chris?
just gonna say, so inexperience is a big factor on both sides, and the
Oh
terrain
yeah,
certainly doesn't help. And the commanders are still learning how to use their armies. So I mean, a lot of factors that really make Shiloh kind of like this massive battle of green armies that contributes to all that chaos.
he also contributes to. Uh, I don't know if there's a desertion rate higher for any battle in the
Mm,
war, and that's Union and Confederate. You know, now one of the reasons I think that Grant's men after the war, in particular, started going like very angry at Buell's men is because they kept saying like, "We saved you," and I'm like, on April 6th, and then they would talk about all the stragglers they found. Now that's embarrassing, isn't it? You know, and remember, some of those stragglers did later fight in other battles, and you know, we could say redeem themselves.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
One example: 53rd Ohio. That regiment unravels very quickly in the battle. And then I found a thing where Sherman, towards the end of the war, writes, and he berated them too, by the way. Right after Shiloh, he got them into like a square and he just gave them, and they came to talk of the camp, how much he insulted them. And
Hmm.
he writes, Sherman, though, writes into the war, he says, since then you've improved and you've become one of my favorite regiments. You know, I mean, he says it better than that, but you know, you get my drift, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you have men who who'd never been like a lot of the Union troops, especially in the first two divisions get attacked, which are Sherman and Prentiss. Those are inexperienced men. A lot of them ran. They maybe didn't run another battle. Some of them ran away completely. Of course, it's the same thing with the Confederates. Claiborne writes in his report that he says, "I'm embarrassed to say much of my command just left." A lot of them because of loot too. Like they get in the Union camps, like, "Oh, look what I stole," you know.
Yeah, right, right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've got a few accounts of Confederates who like, you know, for instance, some of the guys. I've had a few Confederate accounts. We have guys who get to Corinth to join their regiment because they were in furlough or they were wounded or something. They get there and like, oh, they already marched off that way, and they're marching and they write, yeah, there were a lot of guys coming back to Corinth, just walking by, going, hey, how's it going? You know, like, and so yeah, so both sides have a terrific problem with desertion and units breaking down.
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
know,
Yeah, and
um,
Grant writes about that in his memoirs too, where there are guys clustered along the riverbank at Pittsburgh Landing, and Buell sees him and wants to actually open fire on them to kind of discourage cowardice. And Grant's like, no, they just need time to recollect themselves, and they'll go back in.
I don't know about Buell opening fire on them. I haven't read anything for that.
So
That's
that was actually a source Kurt Fields had found for me.
Oh wow,
Yep.
okay. I want to see
So
that because I'm not saying Buell wouldn't say something like that. He's a very harsh guy, you know. I just like I guess because I somewhat maybe a little defensive about attacks on Buell at Shiloh simply because Rollins made up a story about him wanting to retreat that isn't corroborated,
yeah, yeah,
which I'm not even blaming Rollins for. He's serving his chief. You know what
yeah,
I mean? But
yeah. So
but that being
well,
said, I did find was Thomas Crittenden uh, did say when his division goes, he says, I want you to clear the scum off the banks, and I don't want them to even touch my men.
wow,
Oh no, I mean I've read some harsh stuff, and Bull Nelson. Oh man, like there are so many. The part of the Battle of Shiloh we have the most accounts of is the last Confederate attack at Dill Branch.
hmm,
There's just so much on both sides. Like that the fighting is relatively light. The chapter I'm writing for right now is just monstrous. I might have to divide into two or something because just so much. And you know, all the stories like Nelson's men getting off the boat, and he tries to tell the men to, you know, young guys rally, and they don't. So he has his men put bayonets on, and he says, you know, wade through them with the bayonets. They're not stabbing them, just like, you see a bayonet, you're going to get out of the way, right? And the whole time they have to yell Buell, Buell, Buell as they come up.
oh wow,
Oh yeah, so no, so it is true though. Those Army of the Ohio guys, then and after the war, they vividly write about seeing like the wreckage of humanity at the riverbanks, as one of them called it.
wow,
And that's their first encounter with Grant's army, which was then essentially called the Army of West Tennessee because it's the District of West Tennessee. got renamed to the name we know it of as the Army of the Tennessee right after Shiloh. But the point is like, man, that's a really bad introduction,
Yeah, right, right.
you know, not an encouraging one, you know. Anyways, I
So we dove right in here, but maybe we should step
know.
back just a second. And well, that's my fault. Give us your thumbnail sketch of what happens. What's the Battle of Shiloh? Tell us what it is, what happens. Give us the nutshell.
Okay. Yeah, you're right. We did dive right in, you know, but
Well, because
that's
like
the
I'm
reality.
always interested in people's motivation, like why this battle, and that assumes that all of our listeners know about the Battle of Shiloh, as they should. But for those who don't, let's give them that sketch.
Hey, I will admit, I was thinking the same thing, but I got too excited just nerding out on this. You know? I was like, oh, great, man, we get into details here, you know. But anyways, so an overview sketch of Battle of Shiloh. So, okay, so what happens is the Confederates suffer a series of disasters in the West all at once, essentially. Mill Springs, Fort Henry, Fort Donelson, the fall of New Madrid. So 4 considerable defeats right there. So the Confederates retreat towards Corinth to protect the rail junction and to mass their forces. They start pulling troops off of the Gulf Coast. Both Davis and Robert E. Lee, Robert E. Lee is at the time Davis's military advisor, advised Johnston to attack. Johnston and Beauregard decide to. They want to make it a surprise attack. That's because they have enough intelligence to indicate that the Federals are not entrenched, and their cavalry has hemmed in Grant's cavalry. And Grant at this time, he had just been censured by Halleck. It's not officially censured, but Halleck had been upset with Grant's actions after the fall of Fort Donelson, including visiting Nashville when he wasn't supposed to. Um, and he put Charles F. Smith in charge. So Grant's in charge. He's distracted by other things. So the Confederates are able to march up to the Union Army almost undetected. Some Federals do detect them and report back to the commanders, Sherman and Prentiss. Both of them, especially Sherman, ignore the warnings. The Confederate attack is delayed, which I think is the most important factor in the Confederates losing the battle. So on April 6th, they attack. They gain not a total surprise because, you know, one of the great myths of Shiloh that you still see is people getting bayoneted in tents. That's not true. But you do have a Federal battle line suddenly forming with men in their nightshirts, you know. So, and there is no overall commander because Grant is across the river at Savannah. So, and there was no plan of defense. So the Federal Army forms haphazardly, and you essentially just have this great giant slugging match between the armies. The Confederates gradually pushed the Federals back, although at heavy losses to themselves, and despite some really foolish attacks, especially in the Hornets' Nest area. And at the same time, the Confederate General Albert Sidney Johnston dies in the battle very dramatically. Beauregard takes over. He does not, but by the time Beauregard's approaching Grant's last line, the sun is setting. His men are low on ammunition. They're tired. So Beauregard calls off the attack, which was already kind of unraveling anyway. Grant receives reinforcements from Don Carlos Buell's Army of the Ohio. And with those troops and the men that Grant can put together and Lew Wallace's division, they counterattack on April 7th. And after several hours of fierce fighting, drive the Confederates off. And it's been said that Shiloh is the Gettysburg of the West, insofar as it generates just about as much controversy.
Yeah, yeah. And in its place in the war in April of 62, I mean, this is really the first mass scale slaughter of troops. I mean, people think of about First Manassas, and there are casualties there, but this is like a bloodletting unlike anything that's happened in American history.
Yes, yes. And I've always wondered that real quick about Bull Run, why the losses are relatively light. Um, and for one thing, that's because both of the armies weren't engaged in Bull Run. It's actually, and I mean, some regiments took heavy losses at Bull Run, So I never want to doubt Bull Run. Bull Run's like the bloodiest battle any American had been in up to that point,
Right.
right? But Shiloh, no one's prepared for it.
Right.
Um, Now, you read a bunch of soldier letters, you get certain motifs. for Shiloh. Amongst Grant's men, it's like, oh my God, thank God Buell's here. Uh, the number of times Buell is compared to Blucher at Waterloo gets at a point you go like, don't you guys know any other history? Maybe uh, I only found one reference to it being like Marengo when Desaix came up to help Napoleon, which I actually think Marengo is Shiloh's more like the Battle of Marengo than any other one.
Okay.
But anyways, so but Waterloo is more famous. Um, although I'm in New Orleans, we have a Marengo Street for Napoleon. We have no Waterloo Street. Okay.
And you have a Napoleon house.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The great muffaladas, everybody. Great. So, anyways, so what happens is the one of the other motifs is about how horrible that first night is on both sides. Now, the Confederates also will talk about like, man, we had all this food we ate. I love all the references to the Confederates about guys putting wedges of cheese on their bayonets on April 7th. But what happens is the Confederates also talk about like going to sleep in a tent at night and waking up amongst dead people. And keeping this in mind too, and one of the other things they mentioned is that this great thunderstorm opens up right at midnight and darkens the battlefield. A lot of men say it's one of the darkest nights they've ever encountered.
Yeah.
And just rains in torrents for hours. And so the horror of that being amongst the wounded and the dying and dead, and this terrific thunderstorm, and then the gunboats, Tyler and Lexington, firing their cannons off at night. People called it like shafts of lightning shooting across the sky. In the case of the Federals, a lot of them don't have tents. So a lot of them and it's raining so hard they can barely sleep on the ground. So a lot of them just stand up and just wait for the next day.
And again, because they were driven out of their camps earlier, so they leave a lot of their equipment behind.
Yes. And the case of Buell, they got to get there fast, right?
Yeah.
So they just left their stuff. Which by the way is really bad for Buell's men after Shiloh because it's rains. I actually read this thesis about that did a meteorological survey of the area for March, April 1862, and it's like one of the rainiest 2 months that area of America has ever encountered. It really is like throughout March and April, it's raining all of the time. Every other day it's raining, and Buell's men left all the camp stuff back. It was days before it got there, so they were out just like trying to sleep in the rain, and this leads to a lot of sickness in Buell's army.
Yeah.
A lot of Buell's men said the few days after Shiloh was some of those miserable times they had during the war.
Wow.
At the same time, think about this too. You're burying the dead. There's so much dead.
Yeah.
There's not, and to keep another thing I found out as well. Grant's medical service was already pretty taxed at Fort Donelson. Fort Donelson's no cakewalk, of course, right?
Yeah.
Although another thing you keep running into is, especially from William Wallace's division, his men saying Donelson was nothing compared to this. I see that all the time.
Yeah.
Well, think about that. That medical service was taxed during Donelson. Think how bad this is, and so Buell's men are out there, getting rained on, no camp equipment. You can smell horse flesh being burned, which they have an image of. It's either Harper's or Frank Leslie's newspaper, which is, I think, very, very shocking, right? Because you wouldn't expect them to have an image in one of those major newspapers of like Union soldiers burning dead horses. So yeah, no, it's this is about as hellish a baptism of fire as you can get.
Yeah. Now, you had a moment ago mentioned that as the Gettysburg of the West because of the sheer number of controversies that it spawns, and you've touched on a few of those, and that's kind of one of the things I always take away from Shiloh is just like there are all these different points of contention that continue to be debated today. What would you consider to be the most enduring Shiloh controversies that you've had to wrestle with in your work?
Enduring, that's
I mean, we could probably do a couple podcasts about that.
yeah.
And I'm putting you on the spot,
Well,
but
I think like I think I'm going to probably say the Buell stuff simply because what they call the modern interpretation and the one of the reviews I read in my book said it is very much more in the modern school that the last Confederate push idea that Beauregard threw the battle away is just not
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
They don't have when they don't have daylight. I'm not saying Grant's line's impenetrable because maybe at Dill Branch, Tim Smith will bring you hiking out there and show you, and you're like, yeah, this is hard,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
And the only brigade that clears it is Chalmers' brigade, and Chalmers says, man, this was tough.
Yeah.
Um, but that's not the only area. There's other areas. They just would have needed time if they're going to do anything, and whatever. I'm not going to get into that part, but the idea that at Dill Branch they're on the eve of victory is probably not true. That one's kind of been laid to rest.
Yeah.
The idea that there was a lull in the battle when Johnston died and Beauregard didn't know what he was doing, no. There is a lull in Johnston's sector where he died, but there's no lull anywhere else,
And it's
and
not
that
and it's
lull
not
is not.
related it's not related to his death necessarily either, as I understand it.
Somewhat, I'd
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
Somewhat. The thing is, they pushed back some Union regiments. They're turning the left. He dies. Things get a bit directionless. Then Bragg finds out about that. He comes over there and takes things in hand, and then they start attacking
Okay.
in that sector, though. And that becomes like Bragg's best hour of his career, maybe. Uh, oh no, like I've run a Confederate accounts where Bragg at that part of Shiloh, they go, man, he was great. Like the soldiers are like, man, he's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
Which, keeping in mind,
You don't hear brag and awesome in the same sentence very often there.
like people, even soldiers who admire Bragg later in the war, would not admire him for like his battlefield charisma, as I call it. That's one they actually are. He's
Yeah.
like leading, he's like pointing stuff, leading men in, giving like heroic statements. I'm like, wow, this is a Bragg you just don't see.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, but it's Johnston had really fired up the army. I mean, Tim Smith's subtitle is so great, "Conquer or Perish." That's what he told Colonel Marmaduke at the morning of the battle. You read, you ever read Johnston's address to his men
Hmm.
before the battle?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like every Confederate goes, that was some stirring stuff.
Yeah.
And I think like one of the reasons somebody like Bragg is acting the way he does at Shiloh is because he's fired up too.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean Albert Sidney Johnston, my God, man, like the the kind of the kind of charisma that guy had in a battlefield, right? Like he's got the tin cup going the bayonets. These must do the work. I want you to show General Beauregard and Bragg we can do it with your toothpicks.
Yeah.
Yelling at men of Arkansas. you know? like, no wonder they were doing what they were doing. I can't think of too many other officers who could fire men up like that. Beauregard has those moments too on April 7th.
Yeah.
When he grabs a flag of the Orleans Guard Battalion, which had friends and relatives of his right there in the regiment. He'd actually been in the regiment for a few days to show solidarity with those friends and relatives, like in 1861. And he grabs their flag, and they got the flag, by the way, at the museum here. And he gives the orders to attack in French, of course.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
you know. And then one of his staff officers says, like, you can't go forward. And he goes, the order must not be follow, but go.
Yeah. Okay.
And on the other end, how many times do you know Grant leading men to battle?
Yeah.
He does it on April
Not.
7th.
Yeah.
He does it. His men go, get to the rear. We don't want you getting shot. you know? Like, how many times has Grant, Grant, of course, this isn't like, oh, he's a coward. Grant understands you're commander of an army, you stay in the rear, right? Shiloh's the one battle where he goes out in the front, starts giving orders, sometimes to regiments. He moves around the 81st Ohio and stuff. He leads an attack at Review Field, And also, Grant that time has the epaulets and the sash and the sword. He does not look like Grant as you'd think of, and a long beard.
Yeah. Right. That's right. He has the very long beard at Shiloh. Yeah.
It's like a long. I was thinking like Grant, because I always think of like the Appomattox outfit, as I call it, like there was like Grant came in muddy boots and simple uniform, and then you're at Shiloh, you're like, no, he looks decked out.
Yeah.
That's because he's trying to impress the man. He knows this. He knows what kind of situation he's in.
Yeah.
You know?
So, and what about Lew Wallace? That's another controversy.
Oh yeah,
Taking the right road or the wrong road, showing up, on time or not, or right place or not. That's been something.
I'm gonna correct myself. That's the most enduring one,
Okay.
and one that will never ever be resolved. Too big of personalities involved, and too many question marks.
Yeah.
We don't have the order that he was given. Did it say take the river road? Did it say just come to the battlefield? Can't say. Can't say. We don't know.
Uh,
We know if you believe Wallace, it was written in pencil and not signed. The perplexing thing is that also who Grant sent to give the first message was his quartermaster, Baxter. Some people believe that's why when the Federals start running out of ammo. That's a big problem at Shiloh. A lot of those Federal regiments will report running out of ammunition, having to fall back.
yeah,
Now, sometimes that's an excuse for, we got routed. You know what I mean?
yeah, right.
But you can run into it so much with the Federals. I do start to go like, they're having ammo problems.
Hmm.
So maybe that contributed. Some people think it did. What's interesting is Baxter disappears after Shiloh.
Hmm.
He's not commended by Grant in his report. He disappears from the staff. I've never run into any letters by him or anything about him. He is one of the great mystery men of Shiloh. Is Quartermaster Baxter. So if anybody out there knows anything about Quartermaster Baxter, please contact me. Okay, because I've
Well,
been trying to find something on the guy.
and he'd be
You know,
someone who would be in Grant's crosshairs because Grant, being a former quartermaster himself, like he pays a lot of attention to that. And so I could see if someone underperforms, Grant's going to find someone who can perform the way that Grant feels a
yeah.
quartermaster should do.
But also, like, why is Grant seen as quartermaster to go get a message to Lee
Yeah,
Wallace?
yeah,
Okay, but which I'm not going to be like, oh, that's because Grant's like, no, like we're Baxter and Wallace friends. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah.
Uh, was there a reason why you sent this man? That's what I'd like to know. Because who does Grant send next? God, I forget his name off the top of my head, but he's the one who finds Wallace going down the Shun Pike and says Grant wants you there, and he wants you there like hell. Unit starts turning around. This gets into the controversial thing. Stephen Woodworth takes Wallace to task for essentially flipping his division. So instead of having everybody like, you're staying this way going down the Shun Pike, instead of having everybody just say, just turn around and go that way, no, he flips them because he wants his best units in the front because Wallace says he's not sure he has to fight his way into Grant's camp.
Right.
And remember, man, it's been raining, right? So have you ever driven between the Shiloh battlefield and the town of Crumps, which is, Crumps Landing?
Yeah,
Even today, when you drive through there, you're like, this is a damn swamp.
yeah, right.
And it's been raining a lot. They've been wade through mud. But who's Grant's third messenger? Rawlins. And Rawlins does not mess around.
Yeah, yeah,
You can tell Grant is angry at that point, and understandably so, because he's spending the whole time being like, guys, Wallace and Buell are coming. And then as the day is going on, and those lines are falling apart, and Prentiss is captured, Grant's like, where in the hell is Wallace?
yeah.
And I don't think there's like anybody to blame necessarily. I mean, for one thing, Grant just told Wallace to stand by and be ready, which is understandable because the supply depot is Crump's Landing.
Right.
And then one of the things that distracted Grant was that he was more worried about Crump's than Pittsburgh Landing. Understandably, he's got one division there. That's what the supplies are. Confederate cavalry activity in the area was pretty heavy in the days leading up to Shiloh too.
Yeah.
So he's got a reason to be like worry about Crump's Landing. And even when Wallace marches to Shiloh, he doesn't bring his whole division. I'd say he leaves behind maybe 1,000 men to guard the place. You know. So yeah, that controversy, man, that is never going away. That is as far as controversies getting settled, that one ain't gonna get settled.
Yeah, yeah. One thing people do forget. I mean, of course, Wallace litigates that the whole rest of his career, and as a literal footnote in Grant's memoirs, Grant writes a little note saying, "Oh, new information has finally come to my attention," and he doesn't really absolve Wallace, but he sort of realizes there's probably more to this than I've given him credit for the last 20
Yeah.
years, you know. But it never fully gets resolved. But it's something that Wallace really tries to clear up.
Yeah, and Wallace, like, I mean, God, it consumes him. I mean, understandably consumes him so much, and it's the inspiration for Ben Hur when you think about it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah, because
yeah.
what happens, is what he. I mean, it's overplayed. It's not like Wallace, gets enslaved and then has Jack Hawkins. as an admiral, faster, But, um, but it consumes the rest of his life, and they keep exchanging letters and messages over the years. And some of that's also because Wallace remains so prominent.
Mm,
And this is the opposite of Buell, because a study in pettiness is to read the Grant and Buell articles of battles and leaders of the Civil War,
yeah, yeah.
where they're just taking shots at each other. Not in its entirety. Buell, to his credit, says, "Hey, Grant wasn't drunk." Okay, but you know what I mean. But it gets petty. And I always, every year, I write a bunch of blog posts for Emerging Civil War and Shiloh for the anniversary, and I have a little paragraph where I mention that about the soldiers in the National Tribune essentially just taking each other to task about was Buell needed or not, and it gets really petty,
Yeah,
you know.
sure, sure.
Yeah, no. So no, Wallace. I think I was one of the things that Wallace stays prominent, and whereas a person like Buell, you know, essentially um, sets himself up as an enemy of Grant at that
Hmm.
time. Wallace doesn't. Wallace wants that friendship. Wallace wants that acceptance. He's keeping in mind too. Grant's one of the great leading men of his age.
Mm.
I mean, they don't put you in a massive tomb in New York City for nothing.
Yeah, right. So he wants to kind of bask in the glow and the association of that. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah. What a beautiful building too, man. I can't.
oh
If
yeah,
I go back
Grant's
to New York,
tomb.
I'll go there again.
Yeah, it's a gorgeous, gorgeous memorial. So, before we wrap up, let me ask you, what are Grant's takeaways from Shiloh, and what are Beauregard's takeaways from Shiloh? What do they learn that shapes them as commanders moving forward?
That's a great question. Um, Grant is not going to be caught flat-footed like that again. Now, one thing I really will defend is the fact they didn't entrench. That was not normal practice as much then. Also, drilling. They were concentrating on drilling, which makes perfect sense. And I really learned this writing about Petersburg, because later in the campaign, as they're getting more new troops at Petersburg, Grant emphasizes entrenching. So some of those battles they go into, like Pebbles Farm, even as late as Hatcher's Run, you got men are like, yeah, I never fired my musket until I was shooting at a Confederate.
Wow.
No wonder they take some heavy losses and suffer some embarrassments.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think not entrenching, understandable. There are other mistakes, but not that one. But Grant's never going to be taken flat-footed like that again. Um, there will be gradual improvements in both staff and how he uses his cavalry, although that doesn't really seem to take as much of. I don't really see that as prominently until after Vicksburg. I'm
Mhm.
sorry, not after, before Vicksburg. I mean, so it's really around Vicksburg that Grant's staff is really maturing.
Yeah.
At
Yeah.
this point, he has staff problems, but it's gradually getting better. A lot of them. And
Well, and that's not uncommon either. I mean, if you look at
oh yeah,
Robert
yeah,
E. Lee in the 7 Days, I mean, he has terrible staff issues. So
perfect
you know,
example.
yeah.
Perfect example. Yeah, Beauregard had horrible staff work at Bull Run. I would say at Shiloh, he's probably got the best staff. Although one of his members, who was a New Orleans guy, who was an artist, drew a really bad map of the Shiloh area.
Oh wow.
Yeah, that made them think Pittsburgh Landing was closer than it was.
Okay.
And that copy of that map is kept at Tulane. But anyways, so I think for Grant is simply just not being caught flat-footed. Um, uh, but I also think in some ways he learned more from Fort Donelson in some ways,
Okay.
because you remember he got censured after Fort Donelson,
Right.
and or at least pushed aside a bit. And Grant's reaction to that is, if Halleck likes you, I'm your friend. If Halleck doesn't like you, I don't want to talk to you.
Yeah.
So well, no, yeah, yeah. Think about it. Like he's buddies with Sherman and McPherson, and he doesn't like McClernand.
Yeah. Right. Right.
Remember they were buddies, but all of a sudden he's like, I don't know about McClernand. And they're like, man, I kind of feel bad for McClernand, because after Fort Donelson, McClernand is one of the loudest men saying put Grant back in command.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
yeah. So, but anyway, though, so Shiloh does continue Grant's maturation and understand the politics, and it improves his handling the army. We also must keep in mind that at the time that he fights Shiloh, Grant's leading the largest field army that's ever seen a battle in the Civil War. That's ever seen. He's leading the largest army that had seen a battle that an American had led.
Okay.
You know, which McDowell had that distinction beforehand at Bull Run, but now Grant has it.
Yeah.
You know, I think in the case of Beauregard, also improvements to staff work. But another thing too is, and to be fair, Beauregard doesn't fight as many field battles after Shiloh. But the ones he does not conduct like Shiloh.
Mhm.
Because I think a lesson that Beauregard took away from Bull Run was that the Federals flanked him. Beauregard just orders a bunch of counterattacks. Those counterattacks are not well coordinated, but they do keep McDowell off balance. On April 7th, Grant attacks. I believe Beauregard's biggest mistake is instead of going, whoa, 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 if he's beat, why is he attacking me?
Mm.
He doesn't say that.
Yeah.
He doesn't think Buell's there. He goes, oh, we should just attack. And I think he's thinking that worked at Bull Run. You know,
Okay. Yeah.
he'll never do that again. Also, Confederate cavalry breaks down before the battle because they lost track of Buell.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I want to say there's a tour guide around here, Jonathan Weiss. I'll mention this because he's a bit of a Civil War buff. He goes to battlefields, and we were just talking about Shiloh, and then he just says, "How come they lost track of Buell?" And I was like, "Wait, why didn't I think of that? Why the hell did they lose?" I'm not going to give myself like a genius here, but I'm like, it became a thing for me to like really figure out like, whoa, 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 why they lose track of Buell? Well, two things happened. They called all the cavalry away from Buell, like the First Louisiana, which I have confirmed was there. A nerd thing for you guys out there, because there was a contingent. Was the First Louisiana Cavalry there? Yes, they were. Um, Pulling those men away from the Buell area, like Forrest and his men were monitoring them,
Right.
move them over to the battlefield, a battlefield where cavalry is not particularly useful.
Yeah.
They did have a little bit of cavalry there, but here comes in one of Buell's biggest contributions. Buell, when he crosses at Columbia, Tennessee, sends a portion of his cavalry and some of his infantry to flush what's left of the Confederate cavalry out of the area,
Okay.
and succeeds. And also, they flushed south towards Alabama. So they sent a message to Beauregard saying Buell's going to Alabama.
Right.
And what I'm saying that is because, like, I don't know if you can know of anything before this, but I was like, is this like, does Buell actually, does he have the distinction of sending the Federal cavalry on its first considerable success of the war?
Mm.
Because it's
Yeah.
important how that battle is going to play out. Because, yeah, around April 3rd or 4th, they lose track of Buell.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Beauregard's cavalry work after that will never be that shameful.
Yeah. Uh,
Like
well,
during
and
Bermuda 100, you'll make kill. And during the Petersburg March, you'll pretty good tabs,
yeah.
Anyway, you were saying?
Oh no, I just one of the things I love most about your Petersburg work that you've been doing for Emerging Civil War is it really brings to light how effective Beauregard is as a field commander in those early days of the Battle of Petersburg, and
Yeah.
and so obviously he has learned some really important lessons along the way. Doesn't have the chance, as you mentioned, to apply them on the field that often, but once he finally does, he performs incredibly.
He performs much better. Yeah, yeah. There's I do see a maturation of him as a commander after Shiloh. Too bad that he had the mistake of telling Davis we've won a great victory, only to lose one.
Yeah,
But Beauregard sent that message after his people say Buell's going to Alabama, and then fun one for you. You remember, Buell's army's being brought up by those steamers. Steamboats ain't quiet,
yeah,
right? So you could hear them. David Gilmer, who was the engineer, tells Beauregard, "Yeah, I mean, I think Grant's retreating. That's what those steamers are doing. They're bringing his men away."
yeah. Oops.
Yeah, but that also that goes back to thinking on April 7th. Why does Beauregard, if Grant's attacking, why doesn't he just pause and be like, "Wait, let me take this in hand"? And he goes like, "No, attack." And is the Confederate Army on April 7th, when they're on defensive, when they're doing the defensive, they do well. They unravel when they have to make counterattacks.
Mm,
And by the way, a lot of the field commanders like Trabue, Claiborne, who get those orders to attack, go like, I don't think we should do this. And they go, you attack. And I go, okay, that's my orders. Oh, look, my brigade's gone.
yeah. Whoops, I told you so. Yeah.
Yeah, oh God, especially in Claiborne's case. He had 800 men on April 7th. When he rallies, he has 58.
Wow, that is stunning. That is
Yeah,
stunning.
the brigade just dissolves.
Yeah.
And then
Wow.
Claiborne goes, I have no brigade. So then he just falls back and just helps rallying troops because he has nothing.
Yeah. Nothing else he can do. So.
Nothing else he can do, man. Nothing else he can do. Anyways,
Well,
yeah.
as we consider the anniversary of Shiloh, what's the takeaway you want people to have this year?
What do you mean by takeaway
Well,
exactly?
just we've been studying Shiloh for 160 odd
Ah,
years, and it's like, what more is there to learn? But you're demonstrating today, like, well, I've found this out about this legend. I found that. So like, there's still stuff to learn if we take the second to maybe take a closer look at it. And
yeah,
what's
and also to this sounds almost cliche, but like go back to the sources.
okay?
Because so much stuff we read or we imbibe comes from sometimes lazy books, but more importantly, like I'm doing the review for Kenneth No's book on Lincoln as commander in chief,
Mhm.
and I'm really liking it. But he's pointing out that we have a heroic ideal of Lincoln that's born from Nicolay and Hay, writing this multi-volume work of Lincoln, where the villain is not Jeff Davis or Robert E. Lee, it's McClellan,
Yeah, yeah,
which is very much by the way in the tradition of the antebellum accounts of George Washington. The enemy is not William Howe or George III; it's Charles Lee and Horatio Gates. It's the same. It's the same tradition. Um, and like you really get down into it, you find out that there are certain things that just do not hold up to scrutiny. Well, Tim Smith and company have laid to rest, I believe, that Beauregard could have launched an attack on the night of April 6th and won the battle.
right.
But man, yeah, dude, yeah, we're talking about pettiness. Here's another one for you. Confederate Veteran Magazine is a litany of Beauregard lost Shiloh.
Yeah, right.
Not just that. I found this little section that was like questions for Southern school kids. And one of them's like, how did Beauregard lose Shiloh? Like, now that's a loaded question, right? It's right there. Now, how did Beauregard lose Shiloh? I mean, it's, and I think the one takeaway from the battle, of course, is you continue studying. It's always worth it to know more detail, but also to keep the bigger picture in mind. If your instincts from the research are telling you, wait, maybe this thing I've always heard is not true, because the April 7th one took me a minute because I've always kind of been told the battle is lost at that point. And I'm
Right.
like, I do not think so for
Yeah.
the Confederates. Now, I'm not saying that they had an advantage. I'm not saying it was going to be easy. I think the Federals still had the advantage on April 7th, but I don't think it's impossible if the Confederates had not launched a series of counterattacks for them to at least hold the Federals off and do an orderly retreat, which would count as a victory because they were never going to stay there.
Yeah, right.
There was no plan of staying at Pittsburgh Landing. This is about getting to Grant's army, stealing stuff, which Beauregard says, on that front, we won. I'm like, yes, you did. Yes, you did. The army's much better armed after Shiloh. But, so go there, raid the camp, do as much damage as you can. Maybe you can destroy Grant, maybe you can't, but just do as much damage as you can. If they had been able to do a more orderly retreat, and keep this in mind too, a lot of Confederates left Shiloh thinking they had won.
Yeah.
That is not an uncommon opinion amongst the soldiers, but it's not universal. For one thing, that's certainly true. I think another takeaway should always be kept in mind about Shiloh is that uh, uh, I do believe Larry J. Daniels right when he says, "How's the exact line? The battle that changed the Civil War," because the shock of casualties for this one. I mean, Bull Run and Fort Donelson were pretty bloody for what Americans were used to. Nobody's prepared for Shiloh for its raw carnage, and it gets followed up with Seven Pines and then especially 7 Days.
Mm.
And Americans are in shock. And I think we should just view Shiloh. I think that's one of the reasons why Shiloh's resonated so much. There's so much artwork made for it. There's so many poems for it. It's referenced so heavily. There's so many songs about Shiloh. Men after the war would say, well, I was at Shiloh. This becomes like a badge of honor, or a thing to say, like the equivalent of like what, like Quint saying, I was in Indianapolis sort of thing.
Yeah, right. Right.
Yeah. And I think one of the takeaways of Shiloh is that maybe not of the same, maybe not, yeah, certainly not on the same scale, or for lack of a better term, universality of the shock of John F. Kennedy dying,
Right.
but it's something like that. I believe it is one of these 10 or 15 moments for Americans where there's a gasp.
Yeah, yeah. That's a great
You
way
know,
of putting it. Sort of, and it's a big gestalt shift because it just makes such an impression, and everyone's like,
yeah.
"Whoa."
Although one thing we'll lay to rest though is this myth. I'm laying to rest right here, and it's other people have mentioned it, but I'm really mentioning it. The Federals also come away confident after Shiloh. Almost all of them think it's almost over. So, Grant's memoirs, he says, like, after that, I was like, no, he doesn't. His letters say, we almost got this.
Yeah, yeah.
you know, uh, it's really going to be more as the summer of 1862 goes on that people start going, whoa, whoa, whoa.
Right.
Because remember, right around the same time, Stanton closes the recruiting offices, you know.
Yeah.
So,
Ah.
which is the biggest unforced error of the Civil War.
Yeah, right. For sure. For sure.
I'm still stunned. I'm like, really, huh? There's gonna be something else going on here. I really want to study that someday. Like, why are the recruiting offices closed down? I'm gonna like really get into the detail of it. But point is like, yeah, it does cause. It doesn't cause a lack of confidence, but it does cause a shock, and that's the other one too. The shock. It's almost like the shock is felt more afterwards. So anybody's been through anything traumatic, at first, one common reaction is to hold on, stay the course, keep your cool. And then over time, sometimes years, but something like Shiloh, within weeks, you start seeing some changes. I found this one Confederate account where he's talking to he's wounded and he's recovering, but a bunch of other wounded Confederates come through his area and he just starts talking to them. It's this really unusual first person account. He doesn't name the names, just like random guys giving their opinions or talking about this part of the battle, that part. And I can already see the Confederate reactions are changing. Because remember, the initial reaction leaving Shiloh was, "God, that was hell," but we stole some good equipment and we showed him something, right? Weeks later, especially after Corinth falls, they start going like, "Wait a second, we lost."
Yeah.
And also, I think one last one, the death rate from Corinth also underlines Shiloh.
Mm.
I
Okay.
mean, Union and Confederate soldiers hate Corinth.
Yeah.
Ambrose Bierce calls it the capital of a swamp. It's called a dismal place. We were happy to leave. The graveyard of the army, because how bad the water is. Like I ran this one account from a Louisiana guy where he says like the water you drink it and you could feel the dirt and mud scraping down your neck.
Ugh.
So think about that. You go from Shiloh to these just this. You're seeing people just waste away from diseases and drinking bad water. While the locals are like, yeah, we're going to sell you overpriced goods.
Yeah.
It's yeah. So, anyways, I'm kind of rambling a bit here, but I believe that there is a shock to Shiloh that the northern populace actually feels in some ways before the soldiers do. I think the soldiers needed some time to process because they were there for it actually happening. Like I said, a lot of trauma. Your first reaction is to keep calm.
Yeah. Right. Right.
Later on, do you start doing that, right? And then even if you run to letters later in the war, people will be like, anniversary of Shiloh, or start writing. I've found one or two things where it actually was not something written right after the battle, it was written a year later where the guy starts recollecting something, you know, and
Mm.
then all the paper it's created as well.
Sure.
Right. Well, yeah, God, I mean, like, um, I mean, a lot of all battles create controversies, but man, I mean, I could write a whole book just on generals bickering.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean,
Like what happened.
this did
Yeah.
generate a lot of controversy, which I think is one of the reasons it's kind of interesting to go back and revisit this battle and kind of rethink things and challenge what you know and what you think you know and dig into it yourself, as you say, visit those sources. So the book is called The Shiloh Campaign 1862 Battle for the Heartland. Sean, thanks for spending some time chatting with us today to commemorate the anniversary.
Very happy to be here. Thank you.
So I'm Chris Mackowski for Emerging Civil War. We'll see you online and on the battlefield.